All right, welcome Ryan, welcome Megan. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about Itopia. Before we jump in, can you just quickly tell us what your roles are and tell us a little bit about 8451 and Itopia?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ryan Showalter. Currently, I'm a director of Insight Account Management. 8451 is sort of the analytic arm of Kroger, is probably the simplest way to put forth. So we're analyzing all of Kroger transactions and data to help them make better decisions.
Great, thanks. And Megan?
Awesome. So my name is Megan Conley. I am a lead consultant. I work on the price and promotion team. So helping to analyze how we're pricing and promoting items at Kroger and making more strategic and automated decisions in that space.
That sounds great. And so tell us exactly what is Itopia and why were you all interested in creating this and being a part of it?
Yeah, sure. Itopia really is just what we call a people-led group or associate resource group. But what it what it's become is sort of a space to explore differences between introversion, extroversion, ambiverts, and really try to understand how each other work together, how we even live together beyond the workplace. But also like what are the areas where we as a culture, a work culture, can sort of impact and make 8451 sort of more welcoming or more inclusive to all different types of people and how they think, how they process, where they get their energy is just one angle. So in that vein, we sort of fell and laddered up into our diversity and inclusion arm as well. But it's really just a space to explore introversion and extroversion and what it means for people.
That's great. That sounds
Yeah,
great.
I would say we're also looking to have introverts and extroverts feel balanced, feel welcomed, feel like they belong. I think corporate America kind of seems like an extrovert type of place of go, 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 talk, 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 network, those kind of things. And there are a lot of strengths introverts bring to the table and helping people understand and recognize what those are. And through different strategies we've created, we're trying to create community and a sense of, hey, I belong here and I know who I am as an introvert, and then creating allies in extroverts and how can we work together and how can you help support the introverts in your life. And um, then also trying to do more things externally as well. Like if we do this only at 8451, we can get so far, but if the message gets broader and shared and more of society understands this and we have people coming in and we're attracting and recruiting talent this way, it's really important to kind of make sure we're maximizing our impact.
Got it. I love the mission. And so
Yeah.
can you maybe break down a little bit like how often you guys get together? What does that look like? Are there ongoing initiatives? How many people are involved? Like, can you speak to kind of the scope of Itopia so far?
Yeah, so far we've got roughly about say 100 people involved in the Itopia community.
Yeah.
Give you a perspective, that's about 10% of 8451's workforce. Um, we meet quarterly right now is the plan in terms of sort of these larger meetings, and then throughout the year we're working on sort of projects or briefs that we call them, specific areas that we want to go explore, do some work on, create some content, that type of thing. But we really only meet quarterly, and it's a mix of sort of internal updates and then external speakers.
Got it.
Is what we're sort of focused on this year.
Sounds great.
It didn't start out that way though. So I will say, like in the beginning, which was actually part of your earlier question, I skipped over like how it all got started.
Yeah.
Itopia sort of started with just sort of one person. I was in a meeting. This one person spoke up, was going around the room. Everyone was going around the room saying what they were most sort of proud of, accomplished that week. And one person just said, honestly, speaking in front of a group this size was their biggest accomplishment. And it really, and then he went on to, explain millions of dollars he saved or generated. But it really kind of hit me in that moment of like, that was really powerful. And I wouldn't have done that so young in my career, and sort of like said that. So the strength of that individual sort of coming out, if you will, and saying that really hit me.
Yeah.
And so I just reached out to him, said, hey, how proud I was. And like, I understood where he was, where he was coming from, what that meant. And really, while it seemed like a throwaway sentence, how powerful that really was. Right. And then he asked me about presenting. He had a big presentation, was worried about certain things, sort of, from an introverted point of view.
Yeah. Just
clicked at that moment of like, wait a second, there's lots of people out here probably having these same problems, same questions, same sort of explorations going on. Why don't we do this as a bigger thing than just one-offs? And that's sort of how it started. And we started with like little localized, what we call pods. So the enrollment process, if you will, didn't start with 100 people. It started with 3 or 4. And it was me sort of just going around the people that I thought were introverted and awkwardly asking them to sort of like, hey, you want to get together and talk about introversion? But it started to sort of gain some momentum that way. And we would just explore topics in those pod meetings that were happening sort of like monthly. And then we launched another pod, and then we launched another pod. Right. Got to the point where it was just it was not manageable to keep sort of managing pods, and then it became a bigger meeting. That's sort of where we are.
It's amazing. That's a lot of people in a voluntary community inside an organization that already has a lot of work to do. That's awesome. I mean, clearly people believe in it and they understand it. So maybe speak to a little bit of what are people learning? What do you think are some of the big aha light bulb moments for the introverts about extroverts, or the extroverts about introverts, or maybe ambiverts figuring things out? Like, what are some of these big takeaways that people are starting to understand?
Yeah, so like where we started with sort of in these small pods was really introverted focus. But I think the biggest impact we've had is actually reaching out to extroverts and just providing the awareness of what's happening within an introverted world or an introverted mind.
Yeah,
has been sort of really, probably I would say, the most impactful.
Right.
The second thing that's been most impactful, I think, I would frame it up as just introverts knowing that they're not alone. It can be a very isolated feeling of this is just me. Again, the world around you feels like there's extroversion. You have introverts who are flexing towards extroversion, so they look like they're extroverted. So it feels like only I have sort of these questions, problems, issues, or something like that. Right. So having a community that stands for introversion, that people know is there, that is supporting them, is probably the biggest thing. But to me, it's really about awareness. So the more we can aware and connect others to what's really happening and dispelling some of those stereotypes or myths, has been the biggest game changer. And all of a sudden the relationship can dramatically change when you do this, because this is not one of those areas where you would there's no conscious discrimination of introverts, I don't think. If so, it's not like widespread where we want to sort of block out introverts. So as soon as you make that the unconscious conscious, everything starts changing. And so that's been one of the biggest things we could do. And one of the areas we're focused on, I would say, is sort of disrupting that bias. So we all come with different biases. So how do we just pause so that there's not necessarily judgment about a behavior? You pause and wonder or question what's driving that behavior. Oh, and that's just someone being an introvert or processing. They're not ignoring, being aloof. They're just processing. shifts dramatically how you would interact with that person as you come out, and vice versa, by the way.
For sure.
You know, an extrovert talking on and on and on doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about, or any of those kind of stereotypes that might exist with an extrovert. It's the same thing. Oh, that's how they're getting their energy, or that's how they think, is they think out loud. Introverts sort of think before we speak, extroverts speak and while they think.
Right.
And so, like, just level setting what's happening changes the dynamic, and you remove that judgment. And that, I think that's really powerful, because as an introvert, I can tell you, in my history, have felt very judged a lot of times, just for being who I was. And honestly, at times it got me angry. But I've come to learn that it wasn't done in hateful or spite.
Yeah.
It was lack of awareness. And I wasn't confident enough to explain at the time what was going on, or who I was, or whatever. But once you kind of see that, it's actually really powerful. And again, changes the way I feel, or even look back on those moments. There's less sort of hate towards those, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Those moments now.
Makes a lot of sense. What about you, Megan? Did you have like an aha moment too, where you realized where you were on the introversion, extroversion continuum was affecting the way that you interact with others, whether at work or non-work?
Yeah, so my whole career, I've been told that I need to speak up more. And I didn't really understand what that meant. Like, I don't know, I felt like I was speaking at the times that I needed to be speaking and saying the things that were important to me. So I was kind of confused about what that meant. And then one day I was at a meeting, and I didn't say anything the whole meeting. It was kind of a networking lunch and learn type of session. And I was really just absorbing content. It was in a scenario I didn't know anyone there. It was kind of new, larger group. So I was just sitting there listening. And at the end of the meeting, someone pulled me aside, someone I had never met, and said, you might consider not working here because we really value extroverts. And I noticed you didn't speak up here, so you're probably really introverted. And yeah, I care about you as a person, and I just thought maybe you should know that it might not be a good fit for you here. And that just like really hit me, that someone would say like, I shouldn't work somewhere because I didn't say anything in one meeting. And it wasn't maybe a couple of weeks later where I'd heard about Itopia, connected with Ryan, and really was like, I want to be involved in this because I don't want anyone to ever hear that they're kind of not welcomed here. That's how I felt, like I don't belong here because I need to look like or act like someone else. So that was when I started getting involved and helped kind of create our mission and vision and put structure to our leadership team and getting things launched. And so for me, that was my like, wow, this is impactful. I need a community. I need support. And finding out I'm not alone, and I have this group, and I have other people who have heard this, and we're doing something about it, I think was a really important moment for me with Itopia and in my career. And then on the flip side, my boss is extremely extroverted, like very, very extroverted. He will tell you 11 out of a scale of 1 to 10. And he would a lot of times ask me if I was okay. Like there's a lot of times he'd ask me, are you okay? Are you okay? Because I'm not constantly just like smiling and bubbling around kind of. And it's like, yes, now you're making me feel like maybe I'm not okay. Like I don't know what's going on. Yeah. And Itopia hosted Glenn Cathy. He wrote a manifesto on introversion, and he came in and gave a presentation for 8451 and talked about what is introversion, what are different ways of working. And in there, one of his bullets of things not to do was don't ask an introvert if they're okay, because they're okay. And immediately at that point in the presentation, my boss texted me and said, I'm sorry. Yeah. Like it was just, I think there were a lot of light bulb moments that happened during that presentation for a lot of extroverts. And we continue to get feedback about how impactful just hearing some of those things that seem little, but really make a big difference.
Right. Yeah, that's super, super powerful. Yeah, I think you guys have spoken to both of the sides, right? Like there's the self-awareness part where it's helpful for you to understand better how you operate so that you can make decisions, you can put yourself in the right positions, whether that be in certain circumstances or in certain jobs. But then it's also making sure you can work better with others, because if you can understand how other people operate, you're not as judgmental, you're not even potentially biased on how others do their work. And I remember seeing something along the lines of how you implemented something that had to do with the performance management process to make sure that there wasn't accidentally bias creeping into those performance ratings. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the projects we worked on was this idea of performance management and stripping out that judgment around introversions. And so what we put together was just sort of we called it a flip the script, where we sort of adjusted the language that was being used, or recommended different language that was being used that sometimes could be interpreted negatively by an introvert, and reframing it in a different light, so that you're actually providing feedback that will resonate instead of alienate a potential introvert. And I think the real power of that document was actually adding what it feels like. So not only like what the words were, but then what did that feel? What does that feel like for an introvert? And I think that cut through sort of the noise, because as a manager, again, most people don't want to, make someone feel bad. And so when you added the feeling to it, it caused sort of similar to what Megan said, like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to ever do that by saying you were too quiet. So it has this kind of knee-jerk reaction by adding sort of the feelings behind it.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, the more that we can make sure people become aware of their tendencies and their assumptions about what performance looks like, the better. Like there's lots of good research out there that is illustrating that we assume that those that are extroverted are more likely to have the prototype of what leaders should look like. Those that should step up and those that should get more opportunities. And, we even associate it with more motivation. And, that's just our filtering kind of taking over. And it's not necessarily always accurate. Yeah. So it's really good that you can bring in something that is helping people kind of be more grounded in their process. What do you think are going to be some of the next steps? Like what do you guys want to do with Itopia? Do you want to just increase awareness? Do you want to, bring on more people? Do you want to do more programming? Like what types of things do you have on the radar as to how to potentially make even more of an impact?
Yeah, there's a couple areas. One is continuing that awareness. Again, I think it's critical, because not everyone attended all of our, attends everything or hears it. So like the more we can repetitively provide awareness of how different people think differently and react differently, the better. So we're going to continue to do work there. I think we want to continue to help sort of at the individual level and provide guidance around certain topics or areas where one side might have an advantage based on their natural state, and how do you work your way through those advantages or disadvantages, knowing that there's never one right way to do something. There's multiple ways to get the outcome you want. It might look different, but we want to really focus on the outcome and what that is, instead of like how specifically you got there. Did you do it in a loud way or did you do it in a quiet way? Yep. Does it really matter if we got to where we got to, or where you wanted to go? Right. So a little bit of work there. And then mostly or lastly, how do we create a culture or an environment at 8451 that sort of builds this into itself? And essentially, in some ways, and this is far off, we don't need to exist as Itopia anymore because it's just built into the culture. That's sort of long range goal of what we can do. But like, how do we eliminate that where you actually don't need a group because it already exists? You feel like you're part of something. You feel welcome. Again, with introversion, it's a little different. You were always sort of included. It was always diversified, but you didn't feel like you belong. And that's really where we want to focus the cultural aspects of how do we create that environment where someone, no matter where they are on the scale of introversion and extroversion, just feels like they belong, feels valued for being who they are and not having to be something you're not. You don't have to change sort of who you are to be successful.
Yeah.
It's just different, and that's okay.
Yep.
You got to get people to get to that point throughout 8451 where, yeah, it's okay to think differently. In fact, it's highly valuable.
Right.
And what we really need is the two brains, if you will, working at a high level, bringing the best of both worlds, and everywhere in between is really what we need. But there's things that limit that, and sort of Itopia wants to sort of tackle this.
Right.
Megan,
Yeah, I would say we're examining everything. Like, how can we question every process that exists and make sure that we're thinking about both sides? So since writing that article with you, Scott, I've been involved in our return to office kind of environment of flexibility workforce or task force. So kind of like, how do we think about what does the future of work look like? What does the hybrid model look like? How do we ensure that we're balancing both perspectives and understanding who wants to come into the office and who doesn't? I mean, obviously there are even introverts that do want to go back in the office. And so how do we just kind of think about what does the office look like? What do we need in the way that we work to be inclusive of all temperaments? So that's something that's still kind of ongoing with our involvement, but we're thinking about like when we send surveys out and we ask people, what's your gender, what's your age, those kind of things. Like, do we ask them, are you introvert, ambivert, extrovert, not sure, prefer not to disclose, like those kind of things. So we can start gathering more data. We are looking at even just like training courses that come up. So throughout HR, when you have little scenarios of, Susie and her manager or something, like, is that person an introvert or an extrovert? What's the language that you use when you talk about that person? Like, we're really looking at all of the different ways that introversion could show up and how we talk about that throughout the organization. Something else we recently have done is our performance review process was kind of standard in that you would have a conversation with your manager and then receive the written documentation after the conversation. And we said, hey, can you get the written document first? Let me have some time to read it, digest, process, come up with my questions, and then have a discussion on that. One of our members was really passionate about that and said, hey, this is something I want to take on. And so we did a pilot, we gathered data. Someone said, this is the best performance review I've had in 8 years of working here. So that's things like that. Like, where can we just make what seem like, again, small changes or tweaks, but really make a big impact on day-to-day work life?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I was just going to add like a real concrete example, because I know changing the culture sounds really big, right? And Megan sort of brought it up. But there was a profile of a case study. We were going to do a case study, and there's a profile of a worker. And the exact language that was used in there was, although she's quiet, she contributes after the meeting. And then, went on to the case study. The case study had nothing to do actually with her contributing in a meeting or not, or being quiet. But why? The question, once we saw it, that Itopia brought up was sort of, why did we put that modifier of although? And we don't do that with other groups, but we do that all the time with introverts. So we don't say, although she's a woman, or although she was female, she was very assertive. We don't do that anymore for lots of reasons. But somehow, or for some reason, we do when it comes to introverts. It's always you're too quiet, or although you're quiet, you know, and it's sort of these assumptions and stereotypes that we have. But we were able to strike that. That was stricken out of the training because of Itopia. And that is sort of how you do it, cultural change in a small way, because someone goes through that training who's an introvert, it's only going to compound those feelings. It's not going to stop it. Right. So at least right now we got it stopped. And then what we got to do is, you know, make it more positive and build on it. But at least for the moment, we can stop things like that we see through this group. And that's sort of the power of this group, is now we have a lens that we are seeing things through. HR is thinking about and making sure, as Megan said, you know, adding it to surveys and things like that, so that we get that lens. And then again, once you hear that lens, it's really hard to sort of not change.
Right. Makes sense. Those are great. Yeah. Those incremental, they have to be actionable, incremental, tied to the organization in particular and what their processes are. It's almost, it has to be customized and in the moment of whatever that specific organization is doing to make it work, which is probably great advice for those that are interested in doing something similar. Is there anything else that you could recommend to organizations that either just generally want to be more in tune with introversion, extroversion differences, or B, are interested in starting something similar, maybe at starting off small and having some type of community like Itopia? Any recommendations on where to begin or what should they consider or anything along those lines?
Yeah, great question. Probably the toughest question I've gotten is sort of how do we do this elsewhere? And it's to your point, I definitely customize it to what's going on in your environment, all those kinds of things. So explore that. But I think it's just asking the question would be what I would start with. And it could be, how does this apply to introversion?
Right.
Needs to be something that is at the forefront of what you're thinking about in terms of a culture. Right. Likelihood of somewhere between, I don't know, you might have better research, but anywhere between 20 to 50% of your workforce is probably introverted. And that's pretty significant. Right. And if in some way you're not looking at it through that lens or asking that question, you're potentially alienating a substantial amount of value. Again, if I'm not bringing my whole self to work, if I can't express myself, feel, you know, in the way that I want to express myself and the way that works for me, yeah, and I feel like I keep that closer in, you're not going to get the value that you could out of someone who's introverted. So again, I would start with that question. I would start small. It seemed to work with us, and build your way up. Start with small sort of wins that can showcase what you're doing and the power of it. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be one person. Like I said, even the example I just gave, one person sort of saw what was going on in that case study. Megan mentioned one person had this idea around making our review process a little bit better. So it doesn't have to be this grand thing. It's just one person doing something, yeah, to start. And then from there, you sort of build on it. But right, it takes a lot. So it's a lot of energy. It takes a lot of strength, right, to start it. But once you start it, it becomes a lot easier. Yeah. The hardest part is just starting.
Right.
So just see something, do something, and try it, because right, I think you'll be shocked. At least I was, of like how important this work is. Right. It wasn't like I started this with like this grandiose idea of, even eventually Scott talking to you, like there was no idea of that. It was, I just want to help someone else not go through some of the things I went through. Yeah. And were unneeded. I didn't need to go through that. So how do we not do that? Or how do we do that in a way that is a little bit better? That's all I was trying to do to start, and it's snowballed.
Right.
It's just kind of starting. I don't know, Megan, anything you would add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for people that are wanting to just learn more about introversion, extroversion in general, reading the book Quiet by Susan Cain is a really great place to start for both introverts and extroverts. I think it helps understand what's going on in our brains and our bodies and kind of society overall and how we got where we are is really helpful just from a learning perspective. I think that having leadership support and buy-in is really helpful. If you have at least one person who you can go to and get on your side and say, this is really important to us. How do we get in connection with different folks? How do we get into the right meetings? How do we, make sure that this is something that we're going to get support from the broader organization on?
Right.
It was really helpful for us as we were getting started to have kind of the executive sponsor and someone who could represent us in conversations where we might not have been at the table before. I think that, finding people who just have passion around this, I think it will start coming out, and especially like introverts, I think introverts have a sense of like purpose inside of them. Like there's something that I'm being drawn toward. I need to like fulfill this bigger picture, this broader destiny for myself, and having people who like really care about that mission, they're going to get involved. And so maybe it might not look the same as what an extrovert's motivation might look like, but getting introverts who really care and also getting extroverts involved. Like you need allyship, you need both sides. It can't just be the kind of minority pushing a lot of this.
Right.
And if your company does do like MBTI or some kind of personality assessment and you think it's like a fun team building and you do it for a day and then you put it on the shelf and walk away, I think there's opportunity there of this is a framework, this is language we can use to describe who I am and how I work, and how do we bring that more into our one-on-ones, more into ongoing conversations.
Yeah.
After we have a meeting and you ask me how it went, or I want to give you feedback on something, like how do we use this as common language? Because then you're not making it personal, you're making it about like, hey, this is a difference that we have and how do we come together and work better in different ways.
Right. Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, I think that's a lot of what Cloverleaf trying to do as well, is like create these small pieces of insight about how someone operates so that they can take it and run with it in the moment. And I think there is because of technology, like this can happen more quickly than what it could before, because I do think that idea of like the data dump, it just doesn't all compute very well, where you learn so much about an individual in this team building exercise when they first come on board, or when you have your quarterly meeting, or even less than that, your annual, team building exercise. It's just like in one ear out the other. And so it has to be broken down into those more minor components to really be able to like soak it all up. It's really hard to get your arms around sometimes. This is really helpful. It's good to be able to sit and talk through all of the work that you guys have done at Itopia. And I think there's a lot of people out there that will probably gravitate towards this, that probably didn't think about it as being something that needed to be addressed. But you point out an amazing statistic, right? Like 30 to 40, if not more, some estimates saying, depending upon the definition, on that introversion extroversion range, a lot of people are introverts. And then in Megan, and you brought up the Fast Company article that we wrote, it's like 80% of managers and leaders are extroverts, which is a lot, right? And so that means the people that are making the decisions, talking about the leadership buy-in on how we're going to create cultures and how we're going to do assessments and how we're going to engage in performance and all those types of things, like it's coming from one potential perspective. And if we're not careful, that can kind of infiltrate the way that we communicate and make expectations around what should happen. So there's probably a lot of people out there that will be appreciating the work that you're doing and some of the insights you're coming up with. So thank you both very much. We appreciate this. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It was great.